A British inquiry finds that Russian President Vladimir Putin probably approved the 2006 murder in London of ex-KGB agent Alexander Litvinenko with radioactive polonium-210. Amid renewed tensions between Washington and Jerusalem, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu meets with U.S. Vice President Joe Biden and Secretary of State John Kerry at the Davos summit. And the Palestinian Authority is pushing for a UN Security Council resolution that would declare Israeli settlements in the West Bank illegal under international law. Thank you for staying with us. General Joseph Dunford Jr., the U.S. chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, said today that Russia's bombing campaign in Syria has stabilized the Assad regime. It comes as Washington and Moscow attempt to find common ground in order to launch a comprehensive Syrian peace process. Tamara Ziv has more.
As Western leaders determined to ramp up the fight against Islamic State on Wednesday, Russia announced that critical Syrian peace talks would begin within days.
The political process will begin, we hope, at the soonest, during January. Various dates are being called, but the final decision will be taken by the General Secretary of the UN on the advice and recommendation of his special envoy, Staffan de Mistura. He is currently actively contacting all the Syrian sides, the Syrian government and various opposition groups inside Syria as well as outside. And the Security Council of the UN has tasked him with putting forward an invitation to the Syrian participants for such talks.
His comments came after he met US Secretary of State John Kerry in Zurich, while from the World Economic Forum in Davos, Iran's foreign minister also said Tehran would throw its weight behind a political solution.
A four-point plan: ceasefire, national unity government, constitutional reform, elections based on the new constitution. I believe that's the basic framework that, as Secretary Kerry says, lies at the foundations of the new Security Council resolution.
Russia and Iran are accused of propping up their ally, Syrian President Bashar al-Assad, and Western powers say Moscow is indiscriminately bombing Syrian opposition forces fighting IS.
We don't have the basis for broader cooperation because the Russians are on the wrong track strategically and also, in some cases, tactically, as was noted.
France and the US, which have stepped up airstrikes in the Middle East after the Paris attacks on November 13th, are striving to convince their partners to accelerate the rhythm after a series of setbacks inflicted to the Islamic State on the ground, particularly in Ramadi and Sinjar.
Yes, and we're joined now in studio by senior Middle East analyst Ali Waked. Good evening, Ali. Well, Ali, this seems to be a significant statement by the United States that the president, Bashar al-Assad, has been strengthened by Russia's air campaign in Syria. But this is also what the U.S. has been saying since day one, that this is Russia's motive. Has Russia, in fact, succeeded in strengthening Assad?
It has succeeded in strengthening Assad, with no doubt, but I don't think that the Americans said this in order to give a compliment to the Russians, because we heard Secretary Ash Carter saying that the Russians are going on the wrong track in supporting Assad and fighting the moderate rebels. I think, Ayman, in a very slow but a very confident way, we are seeing the Syrian army on the ground progressing. It is true that here and there we are hearing about some here a village and there another village that are taken by the Islamic State, but the general view of the general image of this conflict is going in favor of the Syrian regime and its alliances, especially when we are seeing that the countries who were the godfathers of the rebels, Turkey and Saudi Arabia, are now their priority also for internal affair, while it seems that the Russians continue to strengthen their support to the Assad regime. Iran will be free from the sanctions very shortly. Formally, it is already, but in the coming weeks, they are going to see more cash in their caches, and it is the question: will the Iranian immediately invest some of these money in contributing to the Russian Russian, Syrian, Iranian effort to keep President Assad in place. And to understand when we say that the Russian campaign stabilized Assad, before the Russian campaign, the international point of view was that President Assad should not be part of any arrangement. After the Russian intervention, we started talking about that he will be part of the transition period. And I won't be surprised that in a couple of months, we are going to hear that President Assad will be allowed to come to the term of his presidency, which means 5 more years.
Yes, Senior Middle East Analyst Ali Waked, thank you very much. We move now to breaking news from Mogadishu. Reports suggest that al-Shabaab militants have taken full control of a hotel and restaurant in the Somali capital of Mogadishu. We will keep you posted as details emerge. And on the topic we discussed with Ali Waked, we have on Skype from Orlando in the U.S., Tom Harb, Chairman of the American Middle East Coalition for Democracy. Good evening. Thank you for being with us tonight.
Good evening.
Mr. Harb, would you agree that the Assad regime has in fact been strengthened by the Russian campaign in Syria, as we've been discussing here tonight?
Yes, the Assad regime has been strengthened by the Russian interference in Syria. However, the Assad regime has not gained any additional ground yet. So therefore, any discussion or any solution in the region, and especially in Syria, has to involve the opposition. But who are the opposition? The opposition who have really the ground, the majority of the ground. But can ISIS and al-Nusra and these guys sit on the negotiation tables? Obviously not, because they are terrorist organizations. They cannot go ahead and sit over there. So therefore, what you need part of this solution, you need to have an Arab forces, an Arab alliance come together and willing to go in to take over the ISIS territories and the al-Nusra territories, and then you could hopefully come to a resolution at the end of the day. However, all the American administration is doing at this time is lip service to the international community, and nobody is willing to commit any international forces on the ground.
Well, Mr. Harb, yes, the general consensus has been that the U.S. is not taking enough action in Syria. In the meantime, do you predict that this statement made by the U.S. today will put it in direct conflict with Russia, which is involved in an air campaign in Syria, in terms of who will control the situation eventually when we look at the fight against the IS?
Well, from our perspective here in the United States, this administration cannot do much anymore. They still have 10 more months, and all what they want to do, point the fingers to somebody else. It's not their fault. They cannot find a solution in Syria. Therefore, it's much easier for the Secretary of State Kerry to blame the Russians at this time. So it would be good for his party during the election year. It's only a political maneuver, more or less.
Well, Mr. Harb, what do you predict that the U.S. statement today means for President Bashar al-Assad ahead of the Syrian ceasefire process?
I don't think there's going to be any ceasefire anywhere, and it's not going to go anywhere. And as I said, this statement is not going to mean much. They have not talked about international troops to be committed into Syria to start taking away the ISIS. As I said, they have not discussed how Bashar al-Assad will be removed from power. They are talk about transition. For how long? Is it going to be 2-3 years for transition based on election to satisfy the Assad regime, or is it going to be 2 months or 3 months? It's really premature, and all of us here in the United States, we don't put much weight on the Secretary of State's statement today.
Well, that begs the question, Mr. Harb, of who exactly wants Assad to be removed, because it seems like at least one global power, Russia, very much wants him to stay in power.
Well, all the Western nations, really, they want him to be removed. And first and foremost, the Syrian people. He's been slaughtering his own people. Over 300,000 people have been killed, and he has not found a solution for his people. So the Syrian people are the first. The Arab nations, the Sunni nations all around the Middle East, they want him to be removed. The only ally he has now is Russia and Iran. Obviously, after Iran got $150 billion, they are going to use it inside Syria to empower their position more than the Assad regime position. They are going to empower their position in their proxy organizations such as Hezbollah and others. But at the end of the day, the Western nations, a couple of years ago, all of them, they were demanding any solution. It has to be the removal of Bashar al-Assad. But today, everyone, Western nations backing away because they are in a weak position. There is no leadership in the West at this time.
Yes, Russia and Iran may be his only allies, but they are powerful allies. Tom Harp joining us from Orlando, Florida. Thank you very much for being with us tonight. And we move to Israel. Tensions between Israel and Hezbollah have been high since the killing of operative Samir Kuntar, allegedly in an Israeli airstrike in November. And yesterday, the Shin Bet announced the dismantling of a West Bank cell that was directed by the son of Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah. At an event held by the Women's International Zionist Organization, I-24 News diplomatic correspondent Tal Shalev had the opportunity to ask the Defense Minister Moshe Ya'alon about the latest developments.
You mentioned Hezbollah, and in the past decade, there has been a relatively calm on the northern border, but just yesterday, the Israeli security services did expose that Hezbollah cell operating inside the West Bank. How wide-scale do you identify these efforts from Hezbollah to operate from within the Palestinian territories?
So many terror factions around us trying to execute terror attacks. All those which I just have mentioned are financed today by Iran. Hezbollah from Lebanon, Hamas, Palestinian Islamic Jihad are financed by Iran. Our security forces, and especially the intelligence guy, are busy day and night, are engaged in many activities to foil their intentions to execute terror attacks quite successfully. Hezbollah is one of the elements as Iranian proxy trying to operate Palestinians and Israeli Arabs as well in order to execute terror attacks. I hope that we will go on succeeding in foiling their intentions.
Yes, now to a story we've been following for quite some time. Migration to Europe remains a big issue, including at the Davos summit. Today, Sweden's prime minister warned that the continent had 2 months to address the crisis or the entire EU could be at risk. I-24 News economy correspondent Daniel Roth with the latest developments.
The topic of asylum seekers, particularly those from Syria and Iraq, in Europe took center stage at the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland, as part of the conference's Open Forum series. And although recent reports show that suitable inclusion of migrant populations has positive impacts on growth, integration has proven to be a challenge for destination countries.
If we don't succeed with integration, then we will fail utterly. Some people have said publicly, we love the country doesn't love us. So it's going to depend on the warmth of the welcome and the comprehensiveness of the integration program.
The challenging situation, which has included reported mass sexual assaults over New Year's centered in Cologne, Germany, has led to growing calls for the EU's borders to be closed to curb the flow of people throughout the region. But with 1.7 million workers crossing European internal borders every day and trucks flowing back and forth, there's a cost which the European Commission pegs at over $3 billion a year, and perhaps the EU itself.
The day will obviously come when we will be wondering whether or not we really need a common currency if there is no longer a single market nor free movement of workers.
Meanwhile, countries neighboring the hardest-hit areas in the Middle East, such as Syria, have taken in massive numbers of refugees. 1.3 million Syrians have made their way to Jordan, which is equal to 20% of their population. And Jordanian Queen Rania was at Davos explaining that while the majority are in cities and towns and economies are feeling the strain, with the proper amount of international support, solutions can be found.
And if we get significant support from the international community, we are willing to set up special economic zones that will employ these refugees. Now, when you do that, not only are you giving the refugee the sense of economic self-sufficiency, which will lower the cost of hosting refugees, but you also give him skills and training that he will put to good use once he returns to his country.
Taking significant space in a forum such as Davos makes sense. The crisis is ongoing and global, and so the solutions will require international focus and cooperation.
Yes, and now for the latest in economy news, I'm joined by financial analyst Lionel Friedfeld. Good evening, Lionel.
Good evening, Mammon.
Well, Lionel, today, volatile reactions in the global markets. Is the catalyst still oil?
Actually, it's maybe one of the worst month of January for the past 20 years in financial market. Yesterday and the day before, we saw, the stock market went down in between 2 to 4%. It did the US, the Downs, in Europe also, but also Asian stock market. Today, Asian stock market, still the Nikkei in Japan is losing more than 2%, and also the Hang Seng in Hong Kong. There is a rebound today, mostly in Europe and today in the US, because of the ECB. Mario Draghi said that basically he's going to use any tools he can to prevent a major financial crisis. Basically, why the stock market are going down and there is a lot of volatility in the air? The answer is the price of oil, because it went down below the trigger of $27.
And of course, we've been discussing Davos today extensively. Are leaders there aware that this happened today, and are they providing any answers?
Yeah, the main issue is actually political. You're right, political answers, because the price of oil below $27 or $27, it used to be, remember, $100 a year ago. Basically, there is too much capacity, there is too much stock, and obviously, with Iran, having the sanction lifted against the country, they're going to also to go on a market, so the price are going to go down further. So this is one key issue that the people at Davos are also talking about. And also the second issue is China, the slow in the economy, 6.9% of growth. It was expected to be 7%, and in the past it was almost 10%. So basically, if you combine oil and China, you've got a recipe for actually what you're going to see on the financial market.
Well, we've asked you this question so many times before. The answer is always terrible. Is the price of oil still expected to go down?
Actually, I was looking to BP, the CEO of BP, that was saying that maybe it can go down as $10 per barrel. So There is a lot of way to go down, but obviously the interest of investors, of industrial corporates, is actually to refund a new equilibrium, and because otherwise the stock market will not go in a good direction.
Lionel Friedfeld, thank you very much for being with us tonight. We move to the U.S. U.S. President Barack Obama has weighed in on the growing scandal in Flint, Michigan, where families were not immediately informed that the city's drinking water had elevated levels of lead. I-24 News correspondent Uri Shapira has more.
Bad waters are rising in Flint, Michigan over the last few months. A recent scandal revealed that rather than purchase water from Detroit, the authorities in the town have continued to rely on a local river which was found contaminated in 2014. President Barack Obama declared a federal emergency in the city Saturday.
The only job that's more important to me is the job of father. And I know that if I was a parent up there, I would be beside myself that my kid's health could be at risk.
At least 10 people in Michigan have died from Legionnaire's disease during the last 18 months, and the U.S. Health Department said it has not ruled out a link to the toxic tapped water. Michigan Governor Rick Snyder apologized Wednesday for Flint residents. The Republican politician also blamed the Obama administration.
To you, the people of Flint, I say tonight, as I have before, I am sorry and I will fix it. Government failed you, federal, state, and local leaders, by breaking the trust you placed in us.
But this did not stop the outrage in the city, which has a majority of African-American residents and a high unemployment. In 1989, documentarist Michael Moore described in his film Roger and Me the city's financial collapse after General Motors decided to close its plant in the city. Now it seems Flint is once again in the midst of a catastrophe.
And we're staying with the U.S. and news from the race to the White House. Fresh off endorsing Donald Trump, Sarah Palin is on the campaign trail in Iowa with the Republican presidential frontrunner. It comes as Trump's main competitor, Ted Cruz, is taking some hits. ABC News has more.
This morning, more and more prominent Republicans turning their backs on Senator Ted Cruz, first Iowa's governor, and now former Republican presidential nominee Bob Dole, telling the New York Times Cruz is a, quote, extremist and nobody likes him, saying Trump would do a better job because he's kind of a deal maker.
The Washington establishment is rushing over to support Donald Trump.
In the lead up to Iowa, Trump is winning the headline war.
Like I said yesterday in Iowa, no more pussyfooting around. It is time. You deserve the best.
The Sarah Palin endorsement tour firing up the Trump base.
Our vets deserve a commander-in-chief who will let them do their job and go kick ISIS.
Palin making her speech in Tulsa Wednesday personal, talking about her 26-year-old son, Track.
This is kind of the elephant in the room.
Police arrested Track Palin this week for allegedly assaulting his girlfriend. Authorities say the veteran also threatened to shoot himself with an AR-15 assault weapon. Palin telling the crowd her son is coping with PTSD, tying his troubles to a president she says neglects veterans.
The question, though, that comes from our own president, where they have to look at him and wonder, do you know what we go through?
But when Trump took the mic, he set his target on the Democrats who want to be president, especially Senator Bernie Sanders.
Can you imagine this guy, a socialist/communist, is doing well? No, he's beating Hillary Clinton. Can you believe this? This guy, he's a whack job. I really want to run against her, but I really would like to run against Bernie Sanders, too.
Yes, not a dull moment in the race to the White House. And now, Haitian Prime Minister Evans Paul said he was open to postponing a presidential runoff election, but added that the January 24th ballot will go ahead if there is no deal to end a political stalemate. The Caribbean nation has been rocked by protests this week after opposition candidate Jude Celestine vowed to boycott the vote over alleged fraud in the first round. The runoff has already been postponed twice during an inquiry into the claims. And worldwide, some 39,000 underage girls are forced into marriage every day. The situation has led to the formation of various international campaigns against child marriages, which may be paying dividends. I-24 News correspondent Shani Nakhshoni has the story.
On Wednesday, Zimbabwe's top court outlawed marriage for anyone under the age of 18. The Constitutional Court in Harare issued a decision after a case was brought by two women who suffered poverty and lack of education after being forced into child marriages.
Child marriage has been robbing girls of their education, of their childhood, and of any economic opportunities that will accrue if at all they spend their time in school. And the health complications that come with child marriage are quite dire.
Just 1 month ago, a first conference on ending child marriage in Africa was held in Lusaka, Zambia, by the African Union, which estimates that about 14 million underage girls are married on the continent each year, almost all of them forced by their parents. But laws and conferences are not enough. In Mozambique, for example, almost half of all girls are married in their teens, despite a law banning it.
Our overall aim as members of the African Union is to ensure that the scourge of child marriage is eradicated totally in our countries.
The problem is not just an African one. Child marriages are also common in South Asia, East Asia and the Pacific, Latin America and the Caribbean, and in Eastern Europe. Worldwide, 39,000 underage girls are getting married every day. A year ago, Plan, a Norwegian human rights organization, launched a campaign called Stop the Wedding, whose purpose was to raise awareness of minors' marriages. The organization created a blog of a Norwegian 12-year-old girl in which she described her wedding preparations to a 37-year-old man.
My name is Tia and I'm 12 years old, and in about a month I'm getting married.
Politicians and celebrities like Zooey Deschanel and Ashton Kutcher shared the blog and the wedding video on social media, helping it reach 1 billion people.
Today I went with Mom and Guy to try wedding rings. Mom and me were supposed to go to the wedding dress shop today. I tried on about 20 dresses. When I get married to Guy, does that mean we have to do it?
The contrast between the exciting activities of planning a wedding and the bride's age, as well as her Western look, made many relate to the cause and exposed the indifference of Western society towards the rest of the world. As a result of the campaign's success, the Norwegian government took the responsibility for fighting child marriage.
Well, for more on this story, I'm joined by I-24 News correspondent Shani Nakhshoni. Good evening, Shani.
Good evening, Ayman.
Shani, we know that despite this particular move to make child marriages illegal, the situation worldwide is far from being mended.
Yes, because the numbers is amazing. Actually, by the end of this decade, if nothing is done, if other countries wouldn't outlaw children marriage, so we're going to get to the situation where 142 million girls will be married as children. And this is a very, very bad situation to be in, because those girls who are married as children, they are deprived of education, and they probably will have children in a very young age. Therefore, their health will be in not a very good condition. There are a lot of consequences to those children marriages. It's
both social and health consequences to these terrible, terrible numbers. And Shani, you know what struck me about your story was the Norwegian campaign,
yes,
and that it took a Norwegian girl to make so many people aware of what's been going on for years in countries we don't necessarily cover as much.
Yes, and you see politicians all over the world writing about it on social media, but you don't hear about every other girl from the 39,000 a day that are getting married. You don't see posts about an Indian girl or an African girl or a Latin girl. And I think it has something to do with us being very caught up in our own society and our own costumes, and we're not used to it. So when we see a Norwegian girl and we're not used to it, it seems bizarre, it seems funny, and we want to do something about it. But nowadays, especially, I don't know why, but for me, it had something to do with the refugee crisis and the clash of cultures, and many people coming from Africa and the Middle East to Europe. And I think that those problems are the problems of the entire world. It's not longer the problem of that country over there or that country over there.
Well, you know, Shani, the advocates of child marriages would say that we are imposing Western values on people who are not Westerners.
Yes, but I do think that the whole world is changing, and what happens when children are getting married is it's causing very bad things to the society in which they are getting married in. The society stays very poor, very not.
Yes.
So it's for
human values,
yes,
not Western values.
Exactly.
Shani Nakhshoni, thank you very much for this story. We are off for a 10-minute break with an update from our news desk, and the news today will be back. Stay tuned.